Hello, everyone, and warm welcome to our guests from all over the world, with a special welcome to the survivors and their families that are with us today. My name is Ronit, and it is heartwarming for me and for all of us at the Ghetto Fighters House Museum to see such a diverse and engaged audience here. We are grateful for your participation. Today we gather for the International Holocaust Remembrance Day event in partnership with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. And our theme this year is home. That's why we ask you to share where is home for you. I want to explain. The museum was established 75 years ago by Holocaust survivors who came to the Western Galilee in northern Israel to build their home, Kibbutz Lochamei HaGetaot, the Ghetto Fighters Kibbutz. In addition to building their home, they created the house, the Ghetto Fighters House, a house and a home, a museum inside a living community. As Antek Zuckerman, one of the founders, once said, we emerged from shattered walls and came here to build new walls, new houses that pulse with life. We are commemorating the 75th anniversary of the establishment of both the home, their home, and the house, and decided to explore various aspects of these terms to gain a deeper understanding of what their significance and what their role is in our lives today. The distinguished speakers we have here today will share different views on this topic, including the duality of home, what transforms a place into a home, all the essential materials of life. I would like to invite Yigal Cohen, the CEO of the museum, to open the event.
Hello, everyone. On Saturday, October 7th, I was with my family in our home in Kibbutz Eilon, about 2 kilometers south of the border with Lebanon. When we first heard the breaking news about the terrorist attack on border settlements in the south, we realized that our world had changed in an instant. The atmosphere of security, calm, and peace that we had experienced over the years was quickly replaced by extreme feelings of insecurity, gloom, and above all, danger. In the course of that day, we realized that Hezbollah terrorists were on the border fence and the north was heating up. We decided to live alone, and from that day, we have been refugees in our own country. We are in our fifth house since that Saturday, not knowing when we will be able to return home. Despite the many wars here in Israel, the security problems and the political tension, we have always felt a solid sense of security in our state. That has changed. Israel was established 3 short years after the end of World War II. It represented great hope for survivors of the Holocaust, just coming out of the inferno of promise to serve as a warm and secure home. When those horrors had come to an end, young men and women who had lost their families and those dearest to them chose to build their new homes in Israel. They had longed for a home where they could live without fear as free citizens with equal rights in a democratic society that desires life. Indeed, these Holocaust survivors, together with many Jewish refugees who came from different parts of the world, fulfilled the miracle of the creation of the young country, built their homes in it, and formed a stable and safe national home. Today, and in preparation for International Holocaust Remembrance Day, that will take place on January 27th. I would like to draw inspiration from those Holocaust survivors. They were left alone without families, rebuilt their lives and homes, and left us a legacy to light our path toward a stable home, open to all its resistance. May we rebuild from the current hardship and soon return to our safe, stable, and open society with feeling of home for all. Thank you to everyone taking part in this special event, and a warm welcome to our honored guest, Her Excellency Ambassador of Spain, Mrs. Anna Salomon, and His Excellency Ambassador of Lithuania, Mr. Udrius Brozga. Many thanks to our partners from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, Dr. Ralph Meltzer, the director, and Mrs. Judith Stelmach, projector manager, for your long-standing friendship, especially during these days. Thanks to the team members who worked hard to make these events and others throughout the week a memorable experience. Ronit Lusky, Yigal Cohen, Yaron Sur, and Medin Shachar. Our wishes go out to you, Medin, the spirit behind the Talking Memory webinar series. Thank you. A final big thank you to each and every one of you, dear participants worldwide. We wish all quiet and peaceful days soon.
Thank you, Yigal. I'm pleased to introduce Judith Stelmach from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, a dear friend and partner who will now share her remarks.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Ronit and Yigal, for the warm welcome. As mentioned, I'm representing the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, which is a German political foundation believing in social democratic values and trying also to implement them wherever we go and wherever we stay. And we are very, very thankful for the opportunity to collaborate with the Ghetto Fighters House Museum for so many years, especially in the context of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, but also during the year on different other projects and endeavors. The theme we chose this year, home, is probably one of the most universal and at the same time one of the most personal themes that I can imagine. We think that it has a very strong connection both to the past, that we are trying to keep its memory up all the time, every day, every single week and month of the year, but especially on remembrance days like the one that is coming up soon. But it also has a very, very strong connection to the reality that we are experiencing here in Israel during the past few months, as Yigal has mentioned at the beginning of his greetings just a few minutes ago. Home is something that should be an integral part of our lives in a very natural way. And until we do not experience the danger of losing it or the actual necessity or force to lose it, we don't even really think about it. But it gives us the ground for our existence, the safety for having plans and dreams and realizing them. And when it is lost, it's really losing the ground under our feet in a very, very material way. This is what people experienced in Europe during World War II, during the Holocaust. And this is what, unfortunately, many people have been experiencing ever since in many parts of the world and are experiencing at the moment, also in Israel, in the place that was supposed to be a safe haven, a home for the Jewish people. So we will have the opportunity to listen to our honored guests who will share their views with us. And I hope that it will be a fruitful and interesting discussion that will evolve, and that all of you who have come to share this evening with us will enjoy it and will find it useful for you personally and maybe also intellectually. So thank you to the Ghetto Fighters House Museum, to all the dear colleagues we have been working with for so many years, to Yigal, to Ronit, to Chava, to Nadine, to Yaron, to all the rest of the team. And thank you for joining us, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Judith. Our first speaker is Rachel Korazim. Rachel is a Jewish education consultant in curriculum development for Israel and Holocaust education. She opens a window to Israeli society through literature, through stories, poems, and songs of the best Israeli writers, inviting her audience to engage with Israel in an innovative way. Since the beginning of COVID, Rachel created a global community of hundreds of learners who regularly gather online to study Israeli poetry. She teaches at renowned Israeli learning centers like Pardes and Shalom Hartman Institute, and in numerous Jewish communities worldwide. In her free time, Rachel enjoys scuba diving in Mexico and the Red Sea, and she's also a very active grandmother of 8 grandchildren, all living in Israel. Rachel will look into the concept of home through poetry. She will explore the pain, the challenges of having dual homelands as depicted in the poetry of Israeli poets who left their home, their original homeland, to settle in Eretz Israel. Rachel.
Hi, thank you very much for this introduction, and may I also add thank you, Yigal, for including our current situation in Israel in your opening remarks. I didn't know how you were touched personally, but it is good for everybody in this gathering to remember that we are all living in a situation in which the meaning of home had changed since the time this conference was conceived and discussed in such beautiful detail. And as the introductions were shared all around, it was said that the speakers will share their own views, their own opinions. And in my case, it is not the case. I will share, or I will read together with you words and feelings of other people. And let me go straight ahead to my PowerPoint presentation so that we can introduce the voices that we want to introduce to you. So here we go, and let me just clear a little bit more of the screen for you, and you can see that we are going to meet 2 poets, 3 poems of 2 poets. The first is Leah Goldberg, and I included 2 pictures because we will hear 2 voices. One at an earlier phase in her writing and one at a later phase in her writing. And this is why I wanted you to have a chance to look at her as a younger person and then as a slightly older one. Really old she never was. You can see that she was born in the year 1911. Whenever we speak about the birth of Leah Goldberg, there is the issue of was she born in Kaunas in Kovna, or was she born in Königsberg? She actually was born in a hospital in Germany, but was raised in Kaunas, Lithuania, and her mother tongues, therefore, were the languages of that country. She arrives in the mid-30s, well prior to the State of Israel, to first Tel Aviv and then Jerusalem. But by the time she lands in the land of Israel, she is already a published poet. And then she continues to write, to publish poetry, drama, of course, academic articles. She becomes a professor in the Hebrew U, where she establishes the faculty for comparative literature. I always mention that because this is a point there that is painful for me. You can see the year 1970, which is when she passed, not yet reaching 60. I finished high school in 1964. I finished my military service in 67, and I was dreaming of studying comparative literature with Leah Goldberg in Hebrew University. But it was a postgraduate course, and she died before I finished my earlier degrees, and I will never forgive her that. But I compensate by reading and studying a lot of her writings. The second one is Itamar Ya'oz Kest, and honoring the idea of what is home, and home oftentimes is connected to language, and home is connected to name. I put his name in two versions. Itamar Ya'oz Kest with an S is how you will find him on the internet and in publications and such. But underneath, I put the name as it would be written in his original language, which is Hungarian. And he was born in the year 1934, no, not in Budapest, in a small town along the Danube called Szarvas. And he passed away not that long ago here in Tel Aviv. He enjoyed a longer life than Leah Goldberg. And again, in an audience such as yours, these numbers are meaningful because it tells you that Leah Goldberg arrived to Israel well before the state is established. It tells you that Itamar Ya'oz Kest, quickly born 1934, oh my goodness, he is 10 when the Nazis occupied Budapest in 1944. What happened to him? How did he survive? All those of us who are involved in Holocaust history and Holocaust education or studies know that these days are meaningful. So underneath I put also honoring my own origins in Hungary, the full name as it is written and pronounced in Hungarian. So if you were speaking Hungarian, you will always say the last name first. So it will be Kest Peter Ervin. This is how his name would be pronounced in Hungarian. Leah Goldberg leaves home behind of her own volition, her own choice. Itamar Ya'oz Kest and the family make Aliyah after the Holocaust. Let us start with Leah Goldberg. And for that, we are going to move ahead. And what you see on the screen right now is for students and lovers of Israeli literature, Israeli poetry, one of the most famous poems, not only by Leah Goldberg, but in general. And you can see that it gave the name to our gathering as well, The Heartache of Two Homelands. It comes from this poem. And I cannot enumerate to you the many times of lectures, mottos of lectures, etc., are quoting this line. So this is the earlier poem. It is part of a 3-poem series called Trees, Ilanot in Hebrew. It's in a relatively early publication of Leah Goldberg. She's already in the land of Israel. These are not the poems that she had written before in Lithuania. She's already here. She's already teaching. She's already publishing. It is my custom normally to read the original Hebrew first, just so that you hear the sound, especially in this one when the poet invested so much in the onomatopoeic sounds of what she's talking about in Hebrew, something that will be lost to us in the translation. And then honoring the translator, Rachel Tzvia Beck, we will work with the translation. So let me go to the original. Kan lo eshma et kol הקוקייה, כאן לא יחבוש העץ מצנפת שלג, אבל בצל האורנים האלה כל ילדותי שקמה לתחייה. צלצול המחטים היה, אקרא מולדת למרחב השלג, לקרח ירקרק כובל הפלג, ללשון השיר בארץ נוכריה. אולי רק ציפורי מסע יודעות, כשהן תלויות בין ארץ ושמיים, את זה הכאב של שתי המולדות. איתכם אני נשתלתי פעמיים, איתכם אני צמחתי אורנים, ושורשיי בשני נופים שונים. Pine tree in some translations. Here I will not hear the voice of the cuckoo. Here the tree will not wear a cape of snow. But it is here in the shade of these pines, my whole childhood reawakens. The chime of the needles, once upon a time I called the snow space homeland. And the green ice of the river edge was the poem's grammar in a foreign place. Perhaps only migrating birds know, suspended between earth and sky, the heartache of two homelands. With you I was transplanted twice. With you, pine trees, I grew roots in two disparate landscapes. Honestly, truth should be told, I could have spent all my 30 minutes, this is what I was given and I'm grateful for, on this poem, but I will not. I will not. But I will try to sort of cherry pick for you a few things that are worth noticing. Obviously, the notion of home in this poem is the land, is the home land, not just a house or an apartment or a street or a neighborhood. And I want you to see something that is apparent in the Hebrew, even if you cannot read it. It's very important, and translation loses a little bit of it because of the grammatical structure, but still keeps it. So I want to take you to the first line that starts in Hebrew with two words, kan, lo. And in English, here I will not. So, okay, the English needs 4 words for the same notion. We are here. I'm here at the place which is now home. And I want to start talking to you about it. And I will start with a negative. I want you to know what I miss when I'm here. So she is planted. We will see that at the end of the poem. The title is Pine, and she will talk to the pines towards the end of the poem. And if in poetry as well as in literature in general, you are looking for the point of view, you are looking to who is speaking and you want to know who is the addressee, in this poem you need to go all the way to the end before you can see that she is talking to the pine trees. But at the beginning, we are invited to hear the conversation without knowing exactly who she is talking to. We will find that out in the last stanza, not so long. And she starts, if I wanted to make fun of Leah Goldberg, which I will never do because I love her poetry so much, I would say she starts with scratching. She starts with being homesick. And she starts enumerating everything that this country is lacking. Oy vey, no voice of the cuckoo. The tree will not wear a cape of snow. Look at how she mixes so beautifully the sound of the cuckoo, the white color of the snow. And you think that you are now going to hear a lot of whining and homesickness and longing? No. This is Leah Goldberg, very much the teacher at this time, very much the professor in the university and comparative literature. And as soon as she laid down that which is missing, she's reining back. But don't take me on that nostalgic trip. I'm okay where I am. I recognize what I have. But it is here, in the shade of these pines, my whole childhood reawakens. I can sit here under the pine trees of Yerushalayim and remember my childhood. I'm okay. It's here that I can do that. Back to the memories. the chime of the needles. Once upon a time, needles here, needle there. It's now not the missing part. You have pines here, you have pines there. We are comparing. A little bit of introspection. I call the Snow Cape homeland. I used to do that. Now it's Khamsin, now it's hot, now it's Jerusalem, but sometime long ago, I had another homeland. And in that homeland, it wasn't only the cuckoo and the snow and the green eyes of the river edge. Well, rivers do not freeze and become icy in Israel. And all those beautiful sights were the poem's grammar in a foreign place. I had another language of writing. So she now actually showed us in between the two missing parts, comparing identical or similar parts. And now she is reining in, thinking, sharing a thought. Maybe, perhaps, only migrating birds know, suspended between earth and sky, the heartache of two homelands. Migrating birds have two homelands. They have the winter homeland in Europe, in Lithuania, in Hungary, in Poland, and they have when winter is there, then they will come to the warmer lands such as Eretz Israel, such as Africa, such as Egypt, etc. And when they wander between the two homelands, the two places that they call home, they get me. I'm a little bit like that. I don't want to commit. And now, finally, after she had expressed that, and I want to open a big parenthesis. I don't know how many of you can appreciate the courage of saying that in the Zionist early years of the State of Israel. New immigrants were supposed to leave old home, terrible Europe behind and embrace the new homeland, arrive, fall on your bended knees, kiss the land and forget everything of the awfulness that was there, and there was pretty much in Lithuania. And yet she's not going there. She is not denying the connection. She is not hiding the longing. She is not covering up for what she is missing. But she is making a much more courageous statement. With you, I was transplanted twice. With you, pine trees, I grew roots in two disparate landscapes. I can do that. I was rooted there. I re-rooted here. I'm fine. The migrating birds will get what I feel, but I can tell you, reader, beyond the pine tree, she's now talking to the pine tree, I'm okay here. I'm fine. I can embrace the two homelands. That in itself, in the years when this is written, late 50s, probably mid 50s, we always know the publication time of the book and not the exact date of when a given poem is written, is pretty courageous to say in Israel. You were not supposed to be homesick for all Europe, especially not after the Holocaust, right? And yet she's honest about it. Let's, sort of hold hands with Leah Goldberg and see another one. Now, I hate to say that because this is the one I love most. Well, there is none that I love most, but I want you to look at the date. The date, seemingly the date, trust me from the beginning, this is not the date of the poem. This is the title of the poem. But Tel Aviv 1935 was written in the mid-60s. Leah Goldberg dies in 1970. So this is her last decade. Wow, she is already the honorable world-known professor. What happened in Tel Aviv 35? Why would a poet like Leah Goldberg in the 60s, she's not in Tel Aviv anymore, she lives in Yerushalayim by that time on Alfasi Street 16. If you happen to live or visit Jerusalem, you can see her home with a beautiful sign and all that. What happened in Tel Aviv 1935? She made Aliyah. 1935 is when she arrives. And 30 years later, literally, she is looking back on that moment of touching the new homeland, which had not yet become homeland, only in dreams, etc., in Zionist ideas, in ideology. But the reality was not yet created. Now look again at the title and the date. We know what these dates mean. They do not only mean that Itamar Yaoz Kest, our next poet, is 1 year old in Sarvash. It means that this is already after the rise of the Nazis to power. This is when major wave of immigration from Germany starts arriving to Israel. People who look around them don't like what they see and leave Germany. People from Poland will arrive in the 30s for a variety of reasons. You know this history if you are into Holocaust studies. And now Leah Goldberg, again, quickly, at least a stanza or two from the Hebrew before we tackle the translation, the exact same translator. Okay. תל אביב 1935. תרנים על גגות הבתים היו אז כתרני ספינתו של קולומבוס. וכל עורב שעמד על חודם בישר יבשת אחרת. והלכו ברחוב ציקלוני הנוסעים, ושפה של ארץ זרה הייתה ננעצת ביום ה-50 כלהב סכין קרה. איך יכול האוויר של העיר הקטנה לשאת כל כך הרבה זיכרונות ילדות אהבות שנשרו חדרים שרוקנו אי בזה? כי תמונות משחירות בתוך מצלמה התהפכו לילות חורף זקים, לילות קיץ גשומים שמעבר לים, ובקרים אפלים של בירות. וכל צעד תופף אחרי גבך, שירי לכת של צבא נחר, ונדמה אך תחזיר את ראשך, ובים שתה כנסיית עירך. A line that I love a lot, I'll try to make you love it as well. Tel Aviv, 1935. Then the aerials on the city roofs were like the masts of Columbus ships, and every raven that perched on their tips announced a new continent. And the kit bags of travelers walked the streets, and the language of a foreign land cut through the heat of the day like the blade of a cold knife. How could the air of the small city bear so many childhood memories, wilted loves, rooms which were emptied somewhere? Like pictures blackening in a camera, the clear cold night reversed rainy summer nights across the sea and shadowy mornings of great cities. And the sound of footsteps behind your back drum the marching songs of foreign troops. And it seems if you but turn your head, there is your hometown church floating on the sea. Let's take this slowly. Remember, this is reminiscing. It's written 30 years later. It's not a clear, we landed today, I was looking for a room to rent. No, it's something very different. It's those images that remain in your mind after 30 years. And the first one is telling you, you know, I was looking at Tel Aviv when I arrived, and the city looked to me like a boat, like the Columbus ships. And the aerials on the top of them and the ravens, they didn't look like something stable. Maybe the land was still moving under my feet as a newcomer. I did not yet have my feet, you know, on the ground. The ground itself looked like a boat. And I wonder if those ravens that were perched on tip and announced a new continent, is that an image for a boat that is floating the oceans, or are the ravens telling the countries of the people and where they are coming from? Because after the city as a boat, we have another image, also metaphoric. It's not I met Joe Schmo from my town or somebody else. and the kid bags of travelers walk the streets. Can you see her reminiscing eye? She remembers the immigrants carrying bags and suitcases. It's not the people, it's the kit bags that were traveling, walking the streets. So I remember that sight. I don't remember their faces. This is what she's saying. I remember the fact that they were immigrants, that they were carrying stuff, that it was heavy. And then I remember sounds. And the language of a foreign land cut through the heat of the day like the blade of a cold knife. She's in Eretz Israel. Leah Goldberg loves Hebrew. At age 10, she's already trying to write in Hebrew. She dreams about herself in her diary. She wants to become a woman Bialik, Isha Bialik. She wants to be a poet, like the poet Bialik. Okay? And yet when she hears a foreign language in the Khamsin, the Hebrew does not say heat. It names that phenomenon of dry desert wind. Now let me tell you from other poems, Leah Goldberg hated Khamsin. Hated. This is why she moved from Tel Aviv to Yerushalayim. It was easier. No, it's not the reason, but still. I teach a whole series of Leah Goldberg and the heat of Eretz Israel poems. She honestly hated it. So for her, even just to hear another language, a European language in the heat, was just like a cold knife blade cutting through the city. And now after she described the town tour for us, after the sound of the different languages, she's now wondering at this new place, and look what she sees in it. How could the air of the small city bear so many childhood memories, wilted loves, rooms which were now emptied somewhere? Do you know, Tel Aviv, she's asking, what you are now carrying? Do you realize what we immigrants brought with us? The dreams and the loves and the empty rooms left behind? You cannot. Like pictures blackening in the camera, this is what we carry in our hearts. The clear, cold nights reverse. We don't have clear, cold nights here anymore as we used to back home. Rainy summer nights across the sea. Who has rainy summer nights in Eretz Israel? Nobody. You never have rain in the summer. These are all memories. And the shadowy mornings of great cities. We don't even have that many great cities in Eretz Israel. These are all memories. And now comes a very honest revelation. It's not just ideology that brought us here. And the sound of footsteps. Remember 1935? Footsteps behind your back drum the marching songs of foreign troops. Let's be fair, ladies and gentlemen. Not all of us were ardent Zionists. Some of us are refugees. We came because there was no other choice. And coming that way with the longing, and it seems, if you but turn your head, there is your hometown church floating on the sea. Oi. And now take all your Jewish values, and Leah Goldberg is a great Israeli poet, and she's telling you, when I'm thinking about my hometown, when I turn my eye to the sea and I could imagine a memory floating towards me from Kaunas, from Kovna, and what does she remember? The church. If you ever take the trouble, the time and energy to do a Leah Goldberg tour in Kaunas, you will see why. And I was there last May, and I found the church and the home. I needed to. So here is another at the top of her career. Just let me tell you about the experience of coming into a homeland. It's so complex, so multicultural, and I don't have a lot of time, so very quickly to another beloved poet born in a little beautiful town called Sarvash along the Danube with lilac, etc. 10 years old during the Holocaust, survived because luckily they were deported to Austria to a family, a concentration camp, and not to Auschwitz, where most Hungarian Jews were deported. He wrote poetry already then and there. And I will go straight to the English for brevity and time. Dual Roots, the title itself, Du Shorish, and the upper title of the book, In the Hand of the Identity Molder. You come to this country, your identity will be molded. And the translator this time is Avraham Eitan. In the middle of Tel Aviv street, suddenly, to smell a drunken lilac. Oi! Yeah, we have a few, but how many back in Hungary? On the street, sweating like a man because while the sweat covered my glasses, the drunken blue-eyed lilac grew in every corner of Tel Aviv street. And it was too hot, but the fragrance was like the sleeping draught. And in the middle of the street, I saw a river, also heard the sound of a bell, and in the middle of the city, a man lives on the Mediterranean coast, and in the shade of the lilac, the stranger has seen sitting for years on the seashore, but is still sitting on the banks of the river. Chevre, he says, nothing doing. Give me just a whiff of the fragrance of a lilac from back home, and I do not see this huge Mediterranean in Tel Aviv. I see the Danube back home, the river by which sorry, it's not the Danube by Sarvash, it's the Kurish. I see the river of my hometown, and I live in Tel Aviv on the seashore, but in my mind, I'm still sitting on the banks of the river. I think that this is voice enough for the complexity of the notion of what home is. And I think these two very clear voices, both of them committed to Hebrew, both of them committed to the Zionist idea, yet both of them courageous and honest enough to say, your first home is never forgotten, even once you have put your roots in the new land. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for, as you said, cherry picking for us emotions and ideas and dual roots and being rooted and rerouted. Thanks for the fascinating reading of the poems. Our next speaker, we look at another, we can say haven, the United States, where about 140,000 Holocaust survivors arrived immediately after the war. Beth Cohen received a master's from Harvard and a PhD from Clark University's Strassler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, the first American university to grant a PhD in Holocaust history. Her first book, Case Closed, Holocaust Survivors in Postwar America, is an analysis of the reception of survivors by the American Jewish community. Her second book, Child Survivors of the Holocaust, focuses on the experiences of the youngest of the She'erit HaPleta, surviving remnant, who came to the US after the war. She has taught at UCLA, Loyola Marymount University, Chapman, the Cal State University in Northridge. She has also contributed to numerous edited book collections, documentary films, and educational projects, and most recently completed an exhibition on the Holocaust for the UN headquarters in New York. Beth will discuss the experiences of Holocaust survivors who came to the United States and their complex process of finding a sense of home and a place of belonging. Beth.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the Ghetto Fighters House Museum and the Friedrich Ebert Foundation for and the organizers for hosting this event today. And thank you for inviting me to participate with my esteemed colleagues. It's really an honor to be here. And Rachel, I really learned a lot from from your words. Thank you to people all over the world for tuning in, and of course to the survivors who are listening. It is your voices that give life to and animate my work. February 17th, 1949. The SS Marine Jumper pulled into New York Harbor. Among the 546 displaced persons on board was one whose arrival was captured by a New York Times reporter. She wrote, as he, quote, stepped on the gangplank under a gray afternoon sky, a free man on the last bridge to the country of his choosing, and walked on to the bunting-draped pier at Canal Street, he gripped his son's shoulder, and his face streamed with tears of happiness. He kept murmuring in Yiddish, quote, we are here. Now I believe we are here. The father and son were two of the 140,000 surviving souls of the remnant of European Jewry who immigrated to the United States between 1946 through 1954. Their stories of hopeful beginnings and welcoming homes appeared frequently in the contemporary media around the country, as you see here, two examples, emphasizing the speed with which they became model citizens and blended easily into the fabric of American life, helped along by their new hosts. My research tells a different and more complex story. Through documents and oral histories, survivors reveal an exceptionally difficult period of adjustment, often lingering for years. They recall outright rejection by their American co-religionists and their own relatives. They remember the message they received in no uncertain terms. Forget about the past, keep quiet about wartime experiences, and move forward. It is this gap in perceptions that interests me and first provoked me to raise some of the very same questions posed by one reporter nearly 60 years ago. Quote, how would the refugees fit into American life? Above all, would Americans accept them into their homes, their communities, and hearts, end quote. What I asked was the reality of their post-war reception in America. Next slide, please. Fortunately, just as I began my research, I discovered a collection of case files written by social workers at the Jewish Family and Children's Services in Denver, Colorado. This included records of survivors who settled there from 1946 to 1954. This led me to hundreds of case files at the New York Association of New Americans, or NYANA, a Jewish agency created in 1949 to work with refugees in New York City. These collections were the starting point of my study, and you can see here just a couple of examples, some handwritten letters, other typewritten records of meetings that representatives of the Jewish agencies had with survivors. Unmediated by time or by our current iconic perceptions of survivors, they provide a window into the world of refugees, new Americans, displaced persons, or DPs in the aftermath of the Holocaust, a universe parallel to, but vastly different from the PR images of the day. Through these files, I learned that the American Jewish community established an agency in 1946, the United Service for New Americans, or USNA, to resettle the newcomers around the United States. In 1949, USNA created a New York branch, NYANA, as I mentioned, to assist those DPs who remained in New York City, and that was about 60%. One of the first questions that emerged from my research was, where do the refugees want to go? Could I have the next slide, please? And which communities were willing to take them? USNA negotiated with communities around the United States in order to persuade them to agree to a quota of newcomers. It was a struggle for USNA to convince cities and towns not only to accept refugees, but in some instances to keep them. And here's a map produced by USNA. I apologize, the quality is taken from a very old picture, but it gives you an idea of where survivors were sent. And the you'll see the outline of New York State and some of the surrounding states in the tri-state area, and that is where most of their survivors were clustered. However, as you can see, all around the United States, Jewish agencies agreed to accept and work with survivors in their communities. In some communities, the idea of helping was fraught with seemingly legitimate complications. From 1949 until the early 1950s, Emil Salomon, the executive director of the Tulsa, Oklahoma Jewish Federation, argued that Tulsa Jews were too few and the employment opportunities too limited to absorb the number of refugees that USNA had asked of them. To USNA's request that Tulsa accept an additional 10 refugees beyond the 24 that the city expected for 1949, Mr. Salomon replied, "Following a protracted meeting of our executive committee yesterday, it was decided that we dare not increase our DP unit quota beyond the 24 units agreed upon when you were in Tulsa. I've already notified Mr. Edwin Rosenberg and USNA president to this effect. The chief reason is no jobs." Mr. Salomon went on to describe the first DP to come to Tulsa, who after 3 months asked to join his sister in New York. The man, quote, failed utterly in his first job as a tailor's assistant, Mr. Salomon reported. Perhaps USNA might send him from Tulsa to New York. Columbia, South Carolina appears to have been one community willing and eager to try to become involved. In May 1949, an USNA newsletter featured a primer and resettlement for small communities, outlining how the people of Columbia responded to the appeal for help. With no Jewish federation in town, representatives of the synagogue Zionist organizations, the University of South Carolina Hillel, the Hebrew Benevolent Society, and B'nai B'rith all joined together to mobilize the resources of the 200 families in the Jewish community. The article also described the enthusiasm that spilled over to the 90,000 residents of Columbia, along with planning hot meals, furnished apartments, English lessons, jobs, babysitting, medical, dental, legal, and psychological services. The committee also enlisted help from local hairdressers who agreed to provide a free, quote, American up-to-date hairdo to each female newcomer. What happened when the refugees, please don't, can you go back, please? This isn't the correct image. Thank you. What happened when the refugees, American relatives rather than communities, were the sponsors? The response was mixed, very mixed. Sponsorship brought together families who were blood relatives, but had never met and often had vastly different expectations of each other in their new relationship. Many American relatives felt obliged to provide the affidavits that were the DP's tickets out of Europe, but it's clear that they never intended to make a commitment beyond this. Indeed, once the refugees arrived, despite written promises of help, the files are rife with entries such as, the U.S. sponsor is, quote, a distant relative who was in no position to help as she was a worker herself, or relatives could not meet the obligation they had agreed to, or the relative could no longer help because, quote, her financial situation was very bad. Financial aid was one thing, emotional support another. The newcomers needed to feel that they finally were not alone in the world, that someone, especially mishpacha, cared. Therefore, when moral support went undelivered, the rift could be irreparable. One new arrival noted that he, quote, didn't want anything to do with his man, his sponsor, and how much he and his wife resented him for not even inviting them for a Seder, something which they had been longing to attend for years, which they didn't have after they lost their parents, end quote. The night Bela arrived in New York in 1946 is still a painful memory more than 50 years later. Her cousin greeted her at the dock and brought her home. Their arrival coincided with the airing on television of the Milton Berle show. It was, quote, very, very, very popular. Everybody was watching, Bela recalls. It was such an excitement, like who knows what was going on. And I came in the first night, and instead of talking to us, she left us and went to watch Milton Berle. Sonia is still bitter when she recalls her first day in America from a distance of over half a century. Their sponsor, her husband's uncle, was supposed to meet his new family at the boat. No uncle appeared, nor did any of his 5 married children. With $13 to their name, the family took a cab to his address in Brooklyn. Upon reaching the home, they found it dark. A neighbor told them a day earlier, quote, "The Cantors left for Florida. They're not home." Sonia greeted this news with bewilderment. Quote, "They know we are arriving the next day. They get a cable. None of the children are waiting for us. The uncle picks himself up with his wife and leaves for Florida. That," referring to her husband, "is his nephew, his brother's son." "I was devastated," she said. After all, she pressed on, quote, "They were not ignorant. They know what happened. They know the family was killed. Aren't they anxious to see somebody cheer us up, to say we're here for you? I'm glad you survived," end quote. The longing for family was often one-sided. Those far from the horror of Europe had limited imagination about what this need meant, while those who had passed through it were desperate for family connections. After all, it was the primary reason cited by many survivors in choosing to settle in America. For some, their American relatives did not disappoint. Rachel remembers that when other DPs heard of those who had family in the United States, they remarked, quote, "Oh, they are lucky. They're going to relatives." "I didn't say anything because I didn't know my relatives. I couldn't say if they will be good to me or not. How would I know?" As it turned out, she too believed she was one of the fortunate ones. Quote, "My relatives," she states emphatically, "were very, very, very good to me." But she was in contact with others whose experiences differed sharply from her own. When families reneged on their commitments, when refugees were sponsored by communities, or when the newcomers were desperate, they turned to agencies such as Nyana. The agencies adopted the philosophy that they were offering a new beginning to the refugees. What becomes immediately clear from the case files was the agency's focus on employment. Their goal was to help DPs find work as quickly as possible and join the ranks of productive American citizens. By the agency's own accounts, it was doing an exceptional job. USNA President A. Rosenberg called it, quote, "an era of magnificent achievement." And here on the left-hand side, you see an article that appeared in the New York Times. DP's Quick to Catch Tempo of America survey shows, and goes on to say how well the newcomers are adjusting in America. And indeed, it quotes the head of a major welfare organization, terming their adaptability amazing. The agencies, and on the other side of the screen, you'll see an example from New Neighbors, which was an USNA publication talking about the experience of newcomers in Flint, Michigan, and a survivor who is doing exceptionally well, David Gudowski. The agency's assistant, however, was not the only reason they could claim success. Another possibility exists. Several months after thousands began to arrive in New York, Nyana reached a new mandate. Previously promising help to DPs for 5 years, the organization reversed this decision and initiated a new policy. This limited assistance to 1 year. Here's where the case files illustrate a different picture of agency assistance, and along with it, a more complicated vision of refugees' adjustment in the aftermath of the Shoah. Mr. and Mrs. G, 29 and 23 years old, respectively, arrived in New York on April 26, 1949, with their 20-month-old twin boys. They turned to Nyana when their relative could no longer assist them. The family needed funds for an apartment, clothing, and furniture. In addition, there were medical bills. The twins had an infection which required a doctor's attention. The agency worker met with their family and optimistically recorded Mr. G would be able to, quote, "follow through with help from the agency." For the next year, the family met with Nyana representatives who chronicled Mr. G's attempt to find work, any work. He tried to find a spot at a fruit store, but the employer had no place for him. He secured work at a laundry, but was too weak to perform the required tasks and was let go. An undershirt factory in Brooklyn employed him but was soon laid off. He found a position delivering chickens at a kosher butcher, but the shop owner pronounced him too slow for the job. Mr. G's social worker noted in his file he was not, quote, making a real effort. In the meantime, the twins were beset with constant health problems. Finally, he began work as a delivery boy. 3 weeks later, he was fired. By then, it was mid-January and the clock was ticking. In another 4 months, Nyana would terminate aid to the family. Mr. G suggested that his wife, an experienced seamstress, find work. The caseworker agreed. Mrs. G would seek employment and her husband would care for the twins. But several weeks later, she was hospitalized with heart problems. She was too ill to work and her spouse could not look for employment because of the children. Things began looking up slightly a few weeks later when Mr. G found a training job in machine diamond cutting. After 12 weeks, he would earn a minimum salary as a diamond cutter. Nyana agreed to continue subsidizing him during the training. Eventually, he completed the apprenticeship and began earning $20 a week. At this time, the federal minimum wage was 75 cents per hour, or a minimum salary of $30 to $40 a week. As is often the case with immigrants, unscrupulous bosses took advantage. On May 25th, 1950, time ran out for the G family. Nyana terminated financial aid. Mr. G expressed concern over managing on his meager income. The caseworker explained about welfare and the Brownsville branch of the Department of Welfare. The G family was stamped case closed. The family was on its own. The experience of this family was not unique. Rather, it reflects recurring patterns and themes throughout the hundreds of files I analyzed, a striking contrast to the success stories in the post-war media. Nevertheless, if that's all they revealed, it might be tempting to conclude that every immigrant group faces the very same challenges, and this group was no different. Certainly, the agency offered a conventional approach to immigrant care, limited financial assistance, vocational counseling, and English lessons. But what is also monumentally clear is that these were immigrants like no others. They were survivors of genocide. And astonishingly, those dispensing aid were very nearly blind to this fact. Time after time, the DPs make their struggles crushingly apparent in the files. In the agency's rush to have their clients become self-sustaining, however, this aspect of the refugees' care was overlooked. In a letter to a social worker, a young man, Yaakov, expressed his feelings about his new life. He was satisfied with his office job and his progress in English, but he wrote to his social worker in Denver, "This is one side of the medal. The other side is not very hot. I'm very disgusted, and from day to day, I'm getting worse. Very nervous. I feel some kind of a nostalgia, not for my country or my home. The word my country doesn't exist to me. I miss my lost family, my friends, and the system of living. I can't get adjusted here regardless of my attempts. I really drive myself very hard in order to get Americanized. But this is useless. My trying has no success as yet, and I don't think they ever will have. There is a wall of customs, characters, and attitudes. I do not have anything in common with those around me. They will never understand me, even if I speak a better English than they do. It's a terrible problem to me. Furthermore, I don't seem to see a sense in life, and little by little, I lose the courage to live, and that worries me. We can all take only so much, and I am only a human." The example of Yaakov illustrates how one immigrant seemed to be adjusting according to the agency's standards, employment, learning the language, getting on his feet. Nevertheless, he clearly felt a sense of despair rather than achievement. Can I have the next slide, please? And here I want to point out is a quote. Admittedly, I'm jumping a little bit time-wise, but this is the same survivor who was featured in the little article 1950, where the article described how well the survivors were doing in Flint, Michigan. and particularly how David Berdowski was doing. And here is David speaking 30 years later, and he says, "There's not a night that hardly goes by that you don't dream about it, that you don't have nightmares, that you're being chased by Germans, chased by the SS, and very bad nightmares. Sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night screaming, and we have to live with it. We just live with it. It's just as bad living with it now that almost was in the camps. Sure, you established a family, you established a home, and everything else. But whatever happened, we can never forget. It's very, very bad to live without parents, without brothers, without sisters. It's very bad." Many, many stories, both in the case files and the oral histories, echo Yaakov and David's and reveal the bumpy terrain that the survivors traversed as they move forward in America. By focusing on the practical demands of the immediate future, the trauma that the DP survived was often obscured, minimized, or ignored. And at the same time as we see, the immigrant clients were clearly suffering. One woman told her caseworker that, quote, she suffers severe dizziness, heart palpitation, high blood pressure, and a variety of anxieties. She went further on to say how she, quote, wakes in the middle of the night screaming. And although she does not remember exactly what the dream was all about, she does know that it was very bad. Her anxiety plagued her days as well, her social work noticed. She feared the dark in subways and, quote, occasionally she suddenly gets the idea that they're about to be deported and worries about that for days at a time, quote. While she was most eager to work, her nightmares kept her awake for hours and she had difficulty rousing herself in the morning. Her social worker did not probe, but as the majority did in similar instances, encouraged the refugees' search for work. Many, though as the evidence shows, by no means all displaced persons, quickly began the process of acculturating to life in America. They looked for jobs, searched for and settled into apartments, and began raising families. Although urged to abandon the past and look to the future, the newcomers found that moving forward might be possible, but forgetting was difficult. They could not, nor did they want to. Far from repressing their memories, many were eager, willing, even compelled to speak. But few wanted to listen. Survivors' recollections of this are vivid. Quote, "We were very bitter," said one camp survivor, because, quote, "in the beginning," his voice failed, "we started to tell stories nobody wanted to listen. And if somebody listened, they thought that we told them stories that are not true. And from the first minute I spoke," he continued, "when I came to America, when I told people, they thought I'm crazy. They didn't want to listen," he repeated. Another woman was ready to tell her new family about the war years, but when her American cousin asked her if she had had orange juice for breakfast in Auschwitz, she knew she could not and would not share her story. Quote, "People had no understanding," said Hannah. Even more, said one woman, quote, "They didn't really want to know. They were not ready to hear." She remembered, too, that American Jews, quote, were also saying that they had suffered during the war. They didn't have enough meat and sugar. To the refugees, this signaled a deep, even unbridgeable chasm between the two groups and reinforced the belief that their American hosts did not care to hear about, nor did they appreciate what their survivors had endured. Quote, "I saw a lack of understanding in the first years, so I decided not to waste my time," remembered one woman. "It was too emotional to open my wounds," she explained. Even the expression of genuine sympathy toward the survivors was rare, and for that reason important to note. One woman recalled her despair after arriving in the United States. She mourned her murdered family so intensely that she could not stop weeping. At night, she screamed from her nightmares and woke her young cousins. Quote, "Why are you crying?" they wanted to know. The young woman told her relatives. Their response was simple and direct. Quote, "Cry if this will help you," they encouraged her. Moreover, her aunt said, "I know it's not easy for you, but we love you and we want you to be happy." Her aunt's understanding meant a great deal. Quote, "I appreciate those words, what she said to me," recalled the woman in an interview nearly 40 years later. "Till now, I remember them," she explained. Certainly there were those who chose to keep silent. Some simply could not verbalize their experiences. But many, many others' recollections belie the myth of silence. Quote, we, the survivors, even me, I'm talking personally, I wanted to talk about it, emphasized Nessie Godin, who settled in Washington, D.C. in 1949. Why, she asked? Because, quote, in the most horrible times during the Holocaust, we used to sit and talk to each other. The women, cold, hungry, all the women used to say, please don't forget us. If you survive, she was instructed, tell the world what happened. Nessie, as do others, take this obligation seriously. Quote, these women asked me to talk about it, she affirmed, and talk she did. But if the outside world is indifferent, to whom did Nessie and others turn? At first, it was largely amongst themselves that they found the persistent desire to recall a common language of mutual grief and sympathetic ears. No matter where they settled, survivors created groups. Some, eager for family connections, sought out their Landsmannschaften, hometown social groups, started earlier by Jewish immigrants, in the hopes of finding old-timers who knew their murdered relatives. In the absence of Landschaften, survivors created alternatives. In 1950, refugees in Indianapolis, Boston, Denver, and Kansas City all created new American clubs. 12 Polish refugees in Los Angeles banded together in 1952 to form the 1939 club. DPs in Dallas stubbed their association New Texans. Refugees in Cleveland formed the Menorah Group. In community after community, the clubs sprang up and took root. Even in smaller communities like Providence, Rhode Island, survivors sought each other to create extended families. Could I have the next slide, please? And once together, what did the refugees discuss? Nessie Godin recalled 5, 6 coupled survivors coming to our house on the Sabbath, having a little lunch. What did we talk about? Comparing each other's suffering, telling how it was, talking about how by miracle we survived this selection and that selection. And in a way, I think this was really beneficial to us. We didn't keep it inside. Even in social situations, remarked one woman, the topic always came up. In 2003, Mr. Krell, a Polish survivor, was still meeting regularly with a small cadre of other men at a local coffee shop in New York. Over the years, quote, no matter what we started talking about, politics, the stock market, we always ended up talking about the war, he asserted, adding, and we still do. In conclusion, my work about Holocaust survivors in post-war America fills the gap between the optimistic PR accounts and the harsh reality that survivors faced in their new homes. Comforting as it would be to accept the cheerful stories that were highlighted on the radio and newspapers, it would be false. Yes, there were instances of those who found work quickly and had no assistance either from the Jewish agencies or their relatives. But for so many others, as they moved forward towards an uncertain future, the economic path was bumpy, the emotional terrain treacherous, and the help they received disappointing. Together, their stories coalesce into a portrait more fragile and complicated than the public images of the early days. Many years hence, this would change, and survivors would secure their honored and well-deserved place in their American home. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, for an eye-opening talk. One of the questions that was put in the chat deals with what happened with refugees in terms of helping themselves, among themselves, and outside of the family circle. I don't think we have time for that, but it's an interesting question. If you have like one sentence of an answer, that would be great.
Well,
or yes.
Sure. I'll just make it very brief. Many of them, as I said, turned to their own groups for help, and they found support, sometimes financial aid. And also in New York, for example, there was something called the Blue Card, which is an agency that still exists, that was actually started earlier by German refugees. And that was also helpful to some of the survivors who came to the United States. That's just a very brief.
And other questions that come to mind, and future talks will be able to address them. deals with the differences between adults and child survivors, the story of orphans. When we spoke about this topic ahead of time, you mentioned a quote that I can't get out of my head. You said, my war started after the war for child survivors. The whole complex attempt to find and establish a home was another war. But I'm leaving this hanging up in the air with hope people will be curious to read both your books and continue exploring this subject. Thank you so much for your presentation. We're moving on, and I'll say that bridging global Jewish communities is our next topic. It provides a transition from the pain that was discussed so far to some form of healing by encouraging a sense of connectedness and belonging. Iris Posklinsky will address the nuanced question of what home means for the Jewish people and where it can be found. She will present part of her research on how relationships between the Jewish homeland and Jews around the world transformed over time, and particularly how it evolved towards a partnership model. Iris is a community social worker who has been researching and practicing partnerships for many years. She wrote a partnership theory that was established and awarded Best Academic Article by the European Network for Social Policy Analysis. She also investigated the transformation of philanthropic relationship between Israel and overseas, and as part of her work at the Jewish Agency for Israel and Jewish Federations in North America, she engaged in strengthening connections and engaging communities around mutual goals. Iris has 2 boys. She lives in the Western Galilee, and she grows a vineyard and makes delicious home wine with her husband, Yoram. So Iris, on home away from home, from peoplehood to global partnership connections, moving from pain to a form of healing.
תודה רבה, רונית, and thank you for this opportunity to be with you tonight and present some of the insights from my PhD research. And thank you to Rachel and to Beth for an inspiring lecture taking place just a minute ago. And this opportunity of gathering and commemorating 75 years for the International Day of Holocaust, I'm thinking after what we've been through 3 months ago, it's hard for me to decide if this moment in time is a moment of hope or a moment of despair, being again at such a time of threat to the existence of the Jewish people living in its own homeland. So I hope that that we will never have to have days to commemorate such tragic events. So I will speak in the 20 minutes that I have on the historic perspectives of home for the Jewish people. And since the Jewish people are dispersed around the globe, even after the establishment of the State of Israel, I will also discuss the bond between those who live here and those who live abroad, and present some of the insights from my research, which investigated the transformation of the relationship between Jewish people who live here and overseas through the evolution of a partnership spirit. Uri, can we have the first slide, please? Yes, we do. Thank you. Yeah, no, the one before. Toda. Just the one before. Toda rabba. So long before Israel was established, the connection of the Jewish people to Israel as a homeland takes place 5,000 years ago, to the moment, to the biblical moment in time when Abraham was told by God to go onto that land where he will make him a great nation. Then after 400 years of slavery in Egypt, it was the 5th generation of slaves who departed Egypt and walked for 40 years in the desert towards the promised land without knowing how life can be there, just living on prayers and memories, collective memories that pass from generation from one to another. And still, they've done that. The story of the Exodus from Egypt is really a story about coming back home to Israel as a homeland. And then for over 1,000 of years, there were kingdoms in the land of Israel, the kingdom of David and of Solomon's, and others who conquered the land of Israel and ruled here for hundreds of years, the Greeks, the Babylons, the Romans, the Ottomans. Two of the temples in 2 different times were disrupted, and the Jewish people who lived here in the Jewish homeland were exiled twice during that 1,000 years, once by the Babylons and later on by the Romans. And since then, in exile, Israel remained as a memory of a home, a memory that passed on from one generation to another, again, just like at the time in Egypt, without really knowing what it is like, without experiencing living there. And that period of time was for a very long time. And here you see a quote from Yehuda Levi, poet and a writer who lived in Toledo, Spain. He wrote that poem with this line, "My heart is in the east and I in the utmost west." He wrote that 500 years into exile. And he based that on what? If not only on this memory that passes from one generation to another, heritage, prayers, and stories that are kept from one generation to another. And we're jumping almost 2,000 years later. Uri, can you please pass the slide? Toda rabba. We're jumping to the end of the 19th century, to 2 decades in time between 1880 and 1900. During those 2 decades, transformational events took place that formed and impacted the establishment of the Jewish state. And we can think about ourselves. We live in 2024. If we think back 20 years before to the year of 2000 even, would we be able to accomplish such massive accomplishments like the visionary leaders back then accomplished in 20 years? It's remarkable to think about that. And in times when there were hardly any transportations, no computers, no emails, no cell phones, and yet they've done what we're going to talk about just now. So Herzl is writing his first book, The Jewish State, where he seeks to lay out a practical way of realizing the dream of having a national home for the Jewish people. And he writes it 1 year before the first Zionist Congress in Basel. The book opens by explaining why it is so essential and critical to have a national home, a country, and by describing the anti-Semitism that took place back then in Europe. In this book, he raises for the very first time the option of having a Jewish homeland, not in the homeland, but in Argentina, really. And strangely enough, yes, it actually happened. And in Mosesville, near Cordova, in 1889, a colony of about 10,000 Jews was established, funded by the Baron Rothschild, and they had vibrant Jewish life with 7 synagogues and schools, and it was an experiment of building a Jewish community at times when Jewish communities were not as organized as they are today, of course. Needless to say that at the same time, the Baron Rothschild also invested a lot in establishing the colonies, the first colonies here in Israel as well, in Rishon LeZion, and in Zichron Yaakov, and Rosh Pina, etc. And he believed so deeply that, yes, one day there will be a Jewish state here in Israel, that he left an endowment fund of what will be considered today 30 million pounds dedicated to building the Jewish parliament in Israel. And that was many years before the establishment of the State of Israel, which he never lived to witness, of course, and not even his son was able to witness, and it was his daughter-in-law who was present in 1966 in Jerusalem by the Knesset when the Knesset was established, thanks to his dream and commitment to that idea. So in 1902, Herzl is writing his second book, Alt-Neuland, which means the old new land. The original name of the book was actually The New Zion. A year later, this book generated a discussion around yet another consideration of another locality for a national home. This time it was Uganda in Africa. And we won't get into the whole details. Yes, the urgency was again anti-Semitism and the pogroms that took place in Kishinev at that time. And Herzl tried to convince the Zionist Congress that we must have a Jewish state urgently, even if it's not on the land of Israel. And of course, there were objections, but at the end of the day, this idea was abolished, not because of the Zionist Congress, but because of the Brits, who did not want eventually to have a Jewish colony in Uganda. But in any event, this point in time, the first Jewish Congress in Basel was a formative moment in the Jewish history, where over 200 volunteers, all visionary leaders, gathered from 12 different countries, mostly in Europe, which was the center of the Jewish world back then, before the Holocaust. And the purpose was one: let's talk strategically, even if that word did not exist probably, but let's talk strategically on how to make this dream come true. And indeed, they developed a very clear, very sharp, very impactful strategic plan, which you see the photo of it, of that brief agreement on the 4 parts of the plan. We won't get into that, but We can move on with the slides, please. I will just briefly mention that the magic of it was, like we say in community social work, the magic is to give a role to everybody, that they will feel ownership for the initiative, and that everybody could contribute, if it's by making aliyah to Israel, by working the land, by raising funds, by teaching Hebrew, by doing lobbying and advocacy. Everyone who wanted to be part of this big mission could find a role within that strategic plan that they developed. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. We can also witness that much of what began and was instigated at that time, thanks to the first Congress in Basel, we still see it today in the Jewish world. All the methods of collective gathering, of communal life, of lay leadership, of putting your money where your heart is. And if you want to be a board member at a Jewish institute, then you need to also be a donor. That was called the shekel model of philanthropy, and lobbying and advocacy that still takes place today. All those ideas and methods that were developed back then by those volunteers, visionary leaders, is still taking place today in today's Jewish world. The Jewish world was organized through that moment in time. And as Herzl said, we can move to the next slide, please. And as Herzl said, indeed, in Basel, he established the Jewish state. And you can click on again, please. Thank you. And this picture tells the whole story of belief and determination. When in 2 years ago, they commemorated 125 years for that moment in time in Basel. Can we move to the next slide, please? Toda rabba. So we're jumping again about 50 years in time to the establishment of the State of Israel, as if nothing happened in between, but we will focus on that particular place and moment in time. And in the Declaration of Independence, I want us to pay attention to two points in reference to the concept of home. First of all, it recognizes the historic connection of the Jewish people to the land, and to the 2,000 years of exile, being away from their homeland, and the right that was given to them, granted to them by the League of Nations to come back and return to that land that they were exiled from 2,000 years before that. So that's one part of the declaration. And the second one that is also talking about the concept of home, but in a manner that actually created tension between the new government here and Ben-Gurion and the U.S. and the American Jewry, was the. Can you click please on again? Thank you. Is this line that refers to the expectation from Jews around the world to immigrate to Israel? Well, we all worked hard in planning and establishing the State of Israel. Now it is time for Jews from all around the world to make aliyah, to come to live here and take part in its upbuilding. Well, that did not go through so smoothly, especially with American Jewry. Can you please click again? Thank you. Jumping to partnership has to go through the two stages in the relationship between Israel and World Jewry since the inception of Israel. it started by being a very one-sided relationship where world Jewry invested in the establishment of Israel and funded everything that happened here. The relationship was not between people who lived in Israel and people who lived in Jewish communities around the world. It was a connection between the government of Israel and leaders of institutions, Jewish institutions. And the relationship was more of a donor and a country that received donors and a country that received the funds. It was transactional relationship, but very emotional, of course, and the commitment was very profound. But it lacked what we call a peoplehood connection, a people-to-people connection back then. Around or after the Yom Kippur War, when massive of volunteers from around the world came to help out, and more pilgrimage visits came to Israel. It intensified after that. So the 70s and the 80s were an opportunity to experience Israel more closely, to meet the people of Israel, which did not happen before that. Before, it was a mythical perception of the young people in Israel, showing only the side that made Jews around the world very proud of. But the 70s and 80s made it a more humanistic connection. And for the first time, a twinning platform was instigated, connecting communities in Israel, back then mostly neighborhoods, disadvantaged neighborhoods, with Jewish communities abroad. That was Project Renewal. But it opened the door for the more for the form of partnership that we know of today, which is more equal and mutual, and that's the partnership model, which takes place in the past 30 years. So in a partnership, and you can click on the slide for quickly. Thank you. And in a partnership, what matters is the connection and not the transaction and not the donation. And it's not the investment in rehabilitating neighborhoods in Israel that matters. It's not the investment in building Israel that matters. It's actually the connections and the recognition of this needs of the other side as well, which never was on the agenda until the 90s. A slide that we skipped before that talked about evolutions during the 1990s and the awakening of Jewish renewal and the concept of Jewish peoplehood that allowed, Rachel began with Leah Goldberg, and one of the concepts from Leah Goldberg's songs is the chalon v'mar'ah, is the effect of a window and a mirror. When I meet the other, or when I look outside, I also see myself. And that's the nature of a partnership. We are gathering together, but I learned so much about myself through the connection, and Jews abroad learned so much about their Jewish identity and heritage by meeting Israelis, and vice versa. We know of so many Israelis who say that they go from Israel to Jewish communities abroad. They go as Israelis, but they come back Jews, as Jews. They experience Jewish life that they never imagined before. So a partnership is about equality, is about dialogue, it's about friendship, it's about sitting around a table for dinner and talking about challenges in the Jewish world, not in a formal way, but in a more humanistic way. And if you can please click on the next slide, that will take us to our region. One of 43 regions of partnership across Israel is ours, right at the top. If you can see the circle there, that's right by the border with Lebanon, but this is the Western Galilee partnership region. And you can see back to what Yigal Cohen was mentioning before, where he lives is right by the border, and that's where this partnership region is located as well. And it's partnered with 17 Jewish communities in central area US and with Budapest. But again, this is one of 43 regions partnering and connecting close to 400 communities worldwide and with Israel. So with this, I will pass on to Fagie and to Tanja to dive into one of the programs that is delivered by this particular partnership. But I will just say that all projects in every partnership are not carried for the sake of the project. They are carried for the sake of the connection that they allow, that they enable. So, תודה רבה. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iris, for opening us up to the world of partnerships. And we will end our program today with Tanja Ronen and Fagie Benstein, who actually, one lives in Israel, Tanja, and the other lives in Toledo, Ohio, second and third generation of Holocaust survivors, who will discuss their participation in one of the partnership projects that they both founded, called SlidingDors. Voices of the second generation. And as Iris said, it's about the connection. It's about the bonding, about the sense of belonging. So SlidingDors, door with one O, not double O, not a spelling mistake, as you wrote, is a virtual space, a home where second gens, as you call it, explore their identities and come together and talk about their home with parents and their home today. And I would love for you, Tanja, to say a few words about that project.
So I would like, first of all, to thank the Ghetto Fighters House for hosting us, making it for me possible to close a circle. I used to work in the Ghetto Fighters Museum, teaching about the Holocaust, and now I am somehow working with what I've learned there in the partnership and in this project. So thank you, Ghetto Fighters Museum. Then Rachel Korazim, who was one of the lecturers at Ronen College, teaching us about what it means to be a Jew overseas when I was studying Jewish Peoplehood. And Iris for making it possible to do what we do, Fagie and me. So this project is a project between the Western Galilee and Akko in Israel, the central area in the US and Budapest. It actually started at Fagie's living room on one leg, and the other leg in Budapest, Hungary. Both sides of the ocean were looking for ways to tell the story of the Holocaust in schools and connecting the next generation with the survivors. Budapest has a problem of not knowing a lot about what happened to the families of the Jewish people of today. And Fagie was struggling with volunteers in schools telling the story, but she will say something about it later on. And when they told us what they were looking for, I said, wow, this is something that we can work on, because we have here in Israel some second gen and third gen. And it would be very interesting to see how in different parts of the world, the second and third generation are processing what happened to their parents or grandparents during the Holocaust. What has been told in homes, what is being left by parents and grandparents to the next generation, and what we as second gen, I'm second gen, Fagie's third gen. What do we want to tell our kids so that they can carry on the memory, because we all believe it should never be forgotten. So what we do is, or what we did 3 years ago, we started forming groups in each of the American federations, here in our region in the House of Partnerships, and in Budapest in the Israel Cultural Center. And from there, COVID helped us a lot by connecting by Zoom. So we were probably the first partnership using Zoom as a ways of connecting face-to-face, name-to-name, and connecting people to people. And we learned about the people themselves, what they were doing, what the family was like. Then we discussed Jewish holidays. I, for one, discovered that there are still people in the US, I'm not talking about Budapest yet, but in the US, people who were afraid to say that they were Jewish in the open. No, for me, it was a revelation. I was so shocked. And people who did not celebrate Jewish holidays, also for me, something very, very new. And then we decided we are going to put it on paper. So we started interviewing the participants in the different federations. The idea is to collect all those testimonials and make either a virtual book of partnership memories or a real book, but anyways, to make a collection of it and make an exhibition out of it and leave the whole material with the Ghetto Fighters House, which is primarily for me part of my home. I have different rooms in my home. One is partnership, the other one is Ghetto Fighters House, and one is my community here in Israel. So that is me and what we do.
Thank you. Thanks, Tanja. When we spoke earlier, you said that the community that you've built actually brought together members that could feel and sense that could feel a sense of home in each other's homes, right? That's how you connected to our theme today. Fagie, can you share some memorable experience about that sense of home? Less about the product, more about that sense and that feeling of togetherness and home and bridging those.
I can, thank you. But before I say a word, I must, on behalf of the Jewish community, the Jewish Federation in Toledo, express our unconditional love and support. October 7th, while the world seems to have lost the context, we have not. And we just want to say, Am Yisrael Chai, Netzach Yisrael Lo Yishaker. Okay, so we began this program, our federation, our Holocaust education director, I was a professional at the federation at the time. We realized that there was, how are we going to continue this? And my wonderful partner, Tanja, described it. I wanted to express to you some of the experiences we have had and memories. Budapest. I was in Budapest 3 years ago, and one of the participants in this program came running over to me. Her name is Judith. I don't know whether she's on, but she came running over to me and she threw her arms around me and she said to me, Fagie, don't ever, ever leave me. That is the impact that this program has had. And then she and I had the distinct pleasure and pain of visiting and touring the ghetto in Budapest. The connection has become so profound because with each other, and we also realized, by the way, that the different experiences in different countries, the three continents, are very, very, very different. The other memory I want to share with you was in Israel, in the Western Galilee. After Budapest, we came to Israel, and there was a session with second and third gen. And I was so incredibly moved by Israelis who were Shoah survivors and fought in the War of Independence and in the Six-Day War. So here I am listening and connecting personally in Israel with these amazing, precious people. So this program has become very personal for all of us. It has created a sense, if you will, that there is no time or space that will ever come between us. And we look forward to continuing the program, for it has an enormous, enormous, enduring, lasting effect on all of us.
Thank you.
It has become, in a sense, our home.
Thank
this
you.
group of people.
Right.
Yeah,
and our the Toledo home, the partnership home, the three continents home, we're all in each other's homes.
thank you so much. And the idea, the title itself is brilliant, Sliding Doors, Sliding Generations. And thanks for sharing. I hope it will inspire others to come together in such a way to discuss this concept. I would like to end by thanking all of the wonderful and insightful speakers, exploring a concept that usually feels so natural to most of us through poetry, historical research, practical experiences. Your memorable experience, Tanja and Fagie, was really fascinating. We started with the pain of those who left behind a beloved home, with the ruins of homes after the Holocaust. We went through the complications of starting anew and concluded with a form of healing. I hope that this journey also connected us through maybe unseen threads to the founders of the house, of the Ghetto Fighters House that were mentioned at the beginning. Some of us might be making connections to the present. Can a ruined house be reborn and regain stability? Just putting this out there. Anyway, I believe that we all view this term now maybe in a more nuanced and more complex way, realizing that home is not just a physical place, it's a state of mind and much more. I would like to thank all of you that stayed with us for 2 hours now. And I really hope and wish for all of us peaceful days, calm days at home, and in settings that might be for some of us temporary homes. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you in our next upcoming sessions.